Спасибо.
Thank you.
Дарья, Хайнц, Таба.
Taria, Heinz, Taber, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm also very glad to meet you once again. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank both the Russian and foreign participants of the Valdai International Discussion Club for your substantive contribution to the work of this club. And I'd like to thank our distinguished guests for their willingness to participate in a frank, open discussion. Our distinguished moderator has wished me a good retirement in due time, and I wish that for myself as well. This is going to happen, but until I have retired, since I'm still the head of a large power, and that's why I have to show restraint, and I have to tread carefully about what I say. Aggressiveness is not my style. But still, I think in this audience, we have to be frank with each other. We have to engage in an open discussion. Otherwise, it's going to be absolutely senseless. It's going to be bland and uninteresting. So that is the style set forward for our discussion. I think it's in great demand today. Against the backdrop of the drastic changes we're witnessing in this world, the current topic of the Valdai Club today starts our future. The shaping of tomorrow is very apt. Last year, here, we talked about chaos and the world order. Unfortunately, over the last months, we have not seen any changes for the better. To be honest, there have been no changes for the better. The controversies related to the redistribution of political might and influence are only growing. Mutual mistrust narrows our capacity to respond to the challenges the international threat is faced with, the real threats, the real challenges. The very globalization project is under threat. In Europe, we know that, we hear that. We hear talk about the failure of multiculturalism. We believe that this situation is to a large extent due to hasty, mistaken choice, self-complacent choice that was made by the elite of several countries 25 years ago. Back then, at the end of the 90s, 80s, beginning of 90s, there was a chance not just to spur forward the globalization process, there was a chance to make these processes harmonic and sustainable. But judging themselves to be the winners of the Cold War, some countries have chosen to reshuffle the world order to make it suit to their interests. They were in the grasp of euphoria, and they have virtually decided not to engage in frank dialogue with other participants of the world life. They didn't want to perfect the existing mechanisms. They have decided to broaden their and expand their values, their norms, their mechanisms all over the world. They have chosen their own way of security for the select, not for everyone. But as it has turned out, not everyone agrees with that. Let's be quite frank, we understand full well many were in disagreement, but some simply could not withstand the pressure. Some was not ready to do that. But as a result, the world relations system is always febrile, so to speak. The world economy is in a systemic crisis. The principles, the rules that exist both in politics and in economics are constantly reshuffled. Quite often, we see a U-turn with regard to several years ago was a dogmat, a norm. If the powers that be see that something is suitable to them today, they make all the rest follow the new standard. But if these standards become obsolescent in their views, they are jettisoned and new rules are set, or at least there are attempts at doing that. So a decision was taken to use missiles against Belgrade and the heart of Europe, then against Iraq, against Libya. And in Afghanistan, as we know, the operation was launched without the sanction of the UN Security Council, trying to turn to their advantage the strategic balance. Some countries have decided to demolish the international legal regime that prevented the deployment of new ABM systems. Terrorist groups were established and provided with arms. Their atrocities push thousands, millions of people to migration, and whole regions have been plunged into chaos. We see that the freedom of trade is being sacrificed. So-called sanctions are used to exert political pressures in circumvention of the WTO. Closed economic alliances are established with firm rules, and only the transnational corporations of the countries that establish these blocs gain the fruit of that. Why is this happening? Because these countries fail. They have failed to sort everything out within the WTO, so they have decided to put the WTO aside. That's what I've mentioned. And we do not see the willingness of our partners to sort out the issues in true. There are some obsolescent structures like NATO. Despite all the talk about the need to adapt to the new reality, we have seen no adaptation. There is another important mechanism to ensure the transatlantic security, the European security, the OSCE, and there are attempts at turning this organization into an instrument of someone's political interests. So what the OSCE is doing is simply void. Mythical threats are devised, like the so-called Russian military threat. Certainly, this can help gain some advantage, get new budget, make your allies comply with your demands, expand NATO, deploy the equipment and troops closer to our border. Certainly, it is very pleasant to pass for the champions of civilization against the new barbarians. But the thing is, Russia is not trying to attack anyone. That would be ridiculous. Yes, I read your analysis, not just those who are present here today. I hear the analysts from Europe, from the US, and I see that these suggestions are simply ludicrous. In Europe, there are 300 million people, all are members of NATO. I think the US population is 600 million, whereas the population of Russia is just 140 million people. So it would be ludicrous. And yet, such menaces are used as a pretext to serve their own political interests. Hysteria has been fueled within the US with regard to Russia's alleged influence upon the current presidential election. Indeed, the US has many acute challenges like the colossal public debt, to an upsurge in violence with lethal arms used, and arbitrary reactions of the police. I think this is what they should talk during the election. Probably they should talk about that. But the elite do not have much to say. They do not have anything to pacify the society with. So it's far easier to divert the attention of people, to concentrate their efforts on Russia's alleged spies or conduits of influence. I'm wondering, I'd like to pose the same question to you. Is there anyone who seriously thinks that Russia can in any way influence the choice of the American people? Is the US a banana republic? The US is a great power. If I'm wrong, please correct me. So a question arises. Should all of this continue like that in future? What do we have in store for the world? What would the world look like tomorrow? Is there an answer to such questions as how to ensure security, stability, economic growth, sustainability? How can we expand the welfare of our people? However sad that may seem, there is no consensus with regard to these matters. In the world, probably during the discussions that have taken place here, you have arrived at a common conclusion. If that is the case, I'd be curious to listen to that. But certainly there is a shortage of strategies and ideologies for the future, and this in turn creates an atmosphere of incertitude, which has a direct impact upon social sentiments. Social surveys and polls conducted all over the world testifies that people across all continents view future as something gloomy, something looming. Future is not bright and encouraging. It is frightening. People do not have mechanisms to influence this future, to influence the choice of the politics.
Well, yes, formally. There is every aspect of democracy in modern countries: elections, freedom of speech, access to information, the right to express opinion, but even in the so-called developed democracies, most citizens do not have any real influence on the political processes. They do not have a direct, real influence on the authorities. Citizens feel that their interests and the ideas of the elite about the only right course are very different and are increasingly different. As a result, elections and referendums surprise the authorities because people do not vote in the way authoritative, respectable mass media sources advise them to do, not as it is recommended by the so-called system parties. Public movements which were considered too pro-left or too leftist or rightist are pushing back the political hard weight. First, these results were announced, something abnormal. When these results repeated once again, ideas were voiced that the society does not understand those people who are actually at the Olympus. And there is even hysteria that this is a consequence of foreign, as a rule, Russian propaganda. Let me tell you, dear friends and colleagues, I would love to have that propaganda machine in Russia. But unfortunately, this is not the case. We do not have these global mass media, CNN, BBC, and some others. We do not have these capabilities yet. As for the idea about the triumph of populists, it's not about populists and others. It's about the fact that grassroots citizens fail to trust the ruling elite. By the way, the political agenda has been exhausted. The elections cease to be an instrument of change. Elections turn into scandals, into discussion of compromise and information, into discussions of who sleeps with whom. This is simply outrageous. And to be frank, if we take a look at the programs of various presidential candidates, it seems that they are based on the same standards. There is very little difference or no difference at all. Or it seems that they fail to witness the erosion of the middle class when ideological models are imposed, which, as I believe, destroy the cultural and ethnic identity. In some cases, in some countries, national interests are being sacrificed. Sovereignty is denied in exchange for the good treatment on behalf of the owner. So, a question arises. Who is right? The majority of people who want simple things such as stability, free development of their countries, prospects in life for themselves and their children, preservation of security for themselves and their families. People are scared by the fact that terrorism is turning into everyday reality. a terrorist act can take place at the neighboring street, if not at their own street, and any material at hand can turn into weapons of mass destruction, from improvised explosives to trucks. Terrorist attacks that have taken place over recent years in Boston and in other US cities, in Paris, in Brussels, in Nice, in German cities, and unfortunately in Russia as well, show that terrorists do not need cells or any organizational structures. They can act on their own, independently. The only thing that it takes is to ideologically motivate and to send them against enemies, against us. The example of terrorist danger shows our inability to assess the character, the nature, and the reason of increasing threats. We see this as we witness the situation in Syria. We do not manage to stop the bloodshed and to launch the political process. It seems that after these law negotiations, after compromise, we began to form the single front, the single anti-terrorist front. But this is not the case. This front has not been set up. Our personal agreements with the US president did not work as well. There are forces in Washington who have done everything in order to prevent these agreements from being brought to life. And all this shows the irrational willingness of the West to once again repeat their mistakes, to repeat the same mistakes all over again. We all see what's going on in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, in other countries. And I ask myself, where are the results of anti-terrorism and of anti-extremism? On the global scale, well, we do have results on the regional level, but there are no global results in the fight against terrorism, and the threats keep increasing. We all remember the euphoria of some capitals with regard to the so-called Arab Spring. Where is this euphoria now? And Russia's calls for joint fight against terrorism are being ignored. Moreover, terrorist groups continue to arm, to supply, to train. Terrorist groups are still being trained, supplied, to be used for political goals. This is a very dangerous game, and I would like to once again address such actors. Extremists are smarter, wiser, and stronger than you, and by playing with them, you will always lose. Dear participants of the forum, it's obvious that today it is important for the international community to focus on real problems that the whole mankind is facing. Solving these problems would allow to make our world secure and stable and turn the international relations system into an equality-based and just system, and turn the globalization process from the globalization for the chosen ones to globalization for all. I'm sure that we can overcome all differences and contradictions only together on the solid basis of the Charter of the United Nations. It is the UN that remains today the structure which has no equals in terms of its representation and universal nature. It is a unique platform for an equal dialogue. The universal rules of the UN are needed to involve as many actors as possible into the process of humanitarian integration to guarantee their political responsibility and ensure their coordination of their actions while preserving their sovereignty and their individual development models. We do not have any doubts. We are convinced that sovereignty is the central notion of the system of international relations. Strengthening sovereignty guarantees peace, stability at both national and international levels. There are few countries which, as Russia, can base their actions on 1,000-year-old history, and we have learned to value and cherish our independence and freedom. At the same time, we do not claim to dominate in the world, to expand, to confront. In our understanding, true leadership is not about inventing some threats and try to influence others by speculating with these threats. We believe that true leadership is to see real problems, is to pool efforts from all states together, and this is how Russia understands and sees its role in global affairs. The priorities without which the prosperous future of our planet is impossible are obvious. I'm not going to add anything new. This is an equal and indivisible security for all states. Only if we stop armed conflicts and guarantee peaceful development of all countries, only in that case we will be able to talk about the economic development and find a solution to socioeconomic and humanitarian issues. It is important to indeed fight terrorism and extremism, not just on paper. These evil can only be fought through pooling efforts of all states of the world. Russia has been proposing this to all interested partners. We need to place on the international agenda the issue of restoring solid statehood, economy, and social sphere in the Middle East. We need to develop a long-term and comprehensive program. We need to develop a somewhat Marshall Plan for this region that has been torn apart by conflicts, and Russia is ready to be actively involved into this work. World cannot be made stable without progressive development of the global economy. We need to set up conditions for progressive and fruitful labor for the economic growth, to make sure that the world is not divided into those who always win and those who always lose. The rules of the game must give a chance to developing economies to catch up with those who we call developed economies. We need to even the economic growth rates so that the results of economic development and technological development could be available to everyone. And in that case, we will be able to settle one of the gravest problems of today, poverty. It is obvious that economic development must be mutually beneficial and based on universal principles so that each state could become an equal participant of the world economic affairs. In the middle term, it seems that the world economy will continue to regionalize, but regional agreements must supplement instead of substituting universal norms and rules. Russia is in favor of harmonizing regional economic formats based on the principles of transparency and respect for each other's interests. That is how we are building the work within the Eurasian Economic Union. That is how we conduct talks with our partners, including to link the projects of the Eurasian Economic Union with the One Belt, One Road project of China. We expect to be able to create a big Eurasian partnership which might turn in the future into the broad cooperation framework on Eurasia. We have already launched talks in the format 5+1 on the agreement on economic and trade cooperation between all the participants of this process. It is important to develop the human capital. Only high-skilled professionals with only the world with high-skilled professionals and knowledge available will be the world which could be stable. Decent future is impossible without taking care of the environment and dealing with environmental issues. That is why preserving nature and bringing down the anthropogenic burden on the environment will become ever more important. It is also important to protect health globally. This has to do with global epidemics, with increasing mortality rates in many regions. And there are vast opportunities in this field. We need to give an opportunity to all people, the possibility of a long, rich life. The foundation for the future world must be built today by investing into all much promising areas for the future development of mankind. And it is important that we shape our common future during discussions, wide discussions, to hear all reasonable, much promising proposals. And I'm convinced, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, that in this work, you, the members of the Valdai Discussion Club, will be very actively involved. Your experience, your professionalism will allow to give a comprehensive assessment of processes that are underway in Russia and in the world, to forecast long-term trends, to give assessments of those trends, to give recommendations that would help us to find a way forward towards a more prosperous and more stable future, which we all need so much. Thank you very much.